Could this be US President Joe Biden's last State of the Union speech, which he delivered a few hours ago? High stakes as he makes a case for a second term with his approval ratings at rock bottom. For the Republicans, with Nikki Haley out of the primaries, that leaves just Donald Trump in the race. And he's very close to getting the delegates needed to be the presumptive nominee. So here we go again. A Biden-Trump race to the White House. Let's get to the point with opinion editor Lin Su-Ling. Sure, it's Biden, Trump 2.0, but things are so different from 4 years ago in the US and around the world, as you know. Plus, both men have major weaknesses. For President Biden, Democrats are furious about his stance on the Gaza conflict. His approval ratings, as I've said, are rock bottom, and there are growing doubts over whether he's even fit to serve a second term, which will end when he's 86 years old. As for Trump, he's been impeached twice, and he's currently facing several legal battles. So, Su-Ling, what's your reading of how much support each of them has?
Olivia, Biden versus Trump is the biggest political showdown no one is asking for. Age is obviously a factor. Both candidates are smashing the record for oldest contender for the presidency, a record they themselves just set 4 years ago. But it's probably going to hurt Biden a lot more than Trump. After all, he's confused Gaza with Ukraine. He's confused names of European leaders for their dead predecessors. And that special counsel report on his handling of emails identified him as an old elderly man, well-meaning, but with poor memory. On the other hand, though, although two candidates are so different, they could not be more similar in one respect. Their support levels are coming in spite of their track record. In one corner, we have Mr. Make America Great Again. He's an unstoppable force. He swept the Republican primaries, all but 2 states. No one expected him to lock up the presidency and the nomination for the candidacy this early on. That being said, there are some reservations. Some Republican moderates who voted for him in 2020 will have reservations because, after all, he's a guy who's all but called an angry mob to sack Congress and overturn the 2020 elections. But on the other hand, Mr. Biden, he's got failing support despite the fact that he has an impressive track record of revitalizing the US economy, getting businesses to return, rebuilding the chips industry in the US, and yet his polls show that he's got a very dismal support level. Less than 50% of the country supports him at this point. So it would be a mistake to actually compare this to 2020 because, after all, this is sounding a lot more like 2016, where we saw 2 candidates that no one really wanted to vote for. Let's not forget, Mr. Trump at that point in time was not seen as a serious candidate. He was grabbing women, he was seen as a demagogue, he was rude, he was brash, and he was calling his competitors names. And on the other hand, there was Hillary Clinton, who, despite being a very accomplished Secretary of State with strong support levels, was coming in at a point where the issue of handling emails classified during her days as Secretary of State was coming into question. We had the CIA report come out, and people were faced with a tough choice. Who do they vote when you look at 2 not so likable candidates?
Okay, if 2024 is anything like 2020 then, or 2016 for that matter, then how do you see campaigning, voting, and voter turnout going, especially in the critical states?
You see, the thing to understand here is that voting in America is vastly different from voting in Singapore, Olivia. Why do I say that? In Singapore, voting is compulsory. The issue is about the ability for parties to convert people. Conversion is the key. Can they go door to door, talk to people, change their minds? For, after all, everyone has to vote. There's even a public holiday, so there's no reason not to. But in the US, it's a vastly different game. Elections is all about mobilization. You don't get a public holiday like we do right here. They need a reason to come out to vote because otherwise they'll be working, right? So how then do parties give voters a reason to come out? What kind of issues will electrify them? In the 2022 midterms, one big thing just happened. The US Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, which gave Americans the constitutional right to abortions. And that became the issue front and center. The Democrats were able to leverage that, mobilize voters to come out very strongly, and we saw actually a record turnout for the midterms, the second highest since the 1970s, and people aged 18 to 24 who might feel very strongly about abortion came out in droves.
Single-term presidents are typically done when, they're kaput after they leave the White House, but Trump is proving to be quite the comeback story. We've already seen what a Trump presidency looks like, so how better or how worse could a possible second term be?
The one word that I would describe a Trump 2 presidency is unpredictability. Now, at home, we know that Trump has already painted himself as a victim of a deep state. He's been accused of crimes that he did not commit. He's a victim of a stolen election. And I think what you'll see going forward is at home, US institutions will come under strain, especially because he goes after the people who have tried to indict him. Abroad, we know that Trump is very clear about the US being taken advantage of. Most recently, we've seen him talk about how NATO allies who don't pay their fair share will not enjoy the protection of US. He called them delinquents even. So I think the one word to keep in mind if Trump does win the presidency is the idea of unpredictability. Now, it does not mean that countries like Singapore have no agency. We've been able to deal with him on an even-handed, even-keel, mutual interest way. And I think we'll be able to strike that balance going forward.